On the battlefields of Normandy, the most feared enemy wasn't a tank or a sniper, it was the dirt. A single gram of French soil, rich with centuries of farming, contained billions of bacteria. For a soldier, a simple wound wasn't just an injury. It was an invitation to an invisible army of assassins. The previous generation had learned this in the most brutal way possible. In World War I, a scratch from barbed wire could kill you. More men died from infections festering in the mud of the trenches than from enemy bullets. Satisfaction. I understand the stakes now. It's not the wound, it's the dirt. Germany entered the Second World War with a supposed countermeasure, sulfa drugs. For a brief time, they seemed like a miracle. But they had a fatal flaw. Sulfa drugs only stopped bacteria from multiplying. They couldn't kill them. And against the aggressive bacteria in battlefield wounds, they were often useless. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a wall of sand. Satisfaction. Their weapon had a critical weakness. So for a 19-year-old German grenadier named Hans, lying in a crater with a leg full of shrapnel, this was his reality. His own medics couldn't save him from the dirt. The only thing left was the enemy. He saw the American soldier approach, and he knew what came next. The Nadenschuss, the mercy shot. He braced for the end. But what he heard wasn't the crack of a rifle. It was a voice. Medic! Satisfaction. He's not dead yet. But this small act of mercy was just the beginning of a profound mystery. Hans was about to be saved by a secret weapon his own leaders knew about, but had catastrophically failed to secure. The story of that weapon began 16 years earlier, not with an explosion, but with a mistake. A notoriously messy scientist at St. Mary's Hospital in London, Alexander Fleming, had left a petri dish out while he went on vacation. Satisfaction. A simple mistake. When he returned, he found a strange mold growing on it. And around that mold was a perfect circle, a kill zone, where bacteria could not survive. He had stumbled upon penicillin, but here's the part of the story most people don't know. For 10 years, this discovery went almost nowhere. Fleming wasn't a chemist. He couldn't figure out how to extract the active ingredient. The miracle cure was trapped inside the mold. Satisfaction, so the discoverer couldn't even use it. A new problem. The world went on, marching towards another war, while the secret to conquering infection sat dormant in a medical journal. Until two scientists at Oxford University, a world away, dusted off Fleming's research. Working with a tiny budget as German bombs fell on London, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain achieved what Fleming could not. They purified penicillin. They tested it on mice, injecting 8 with a lethal dose of bacteria. 4 were given penicillin. 4 were not. The next morning, the 4 untreated mice were dead. The 4 treated mice were perfectly healthy. Satisfaction. They proved it works. They had the cure. The secret to saving millions of lives. But this incredible success revealed an even more heartbreaking problem. The amount they could produce was infinitesimally small. It took them months, using every bedpan and biscuit tin they could find to grow the mold, just to produce enough to treat a single patient. And even then, they had to collect the man's urine to recycle the precious unmetabolized penicillin for the next dose. Satisfaction. Wow, that's a desperate and clever solution. The cure was real, but it was useless on a global scale. Britain, under siege, did not have the resources for an industrial miracle. But Florey knew a country that did that in 1941, with their nation's fate hanging in the balance. Florey and his colleague made a desperate, secret journey to the neutral United States. They carried no documents. The secret was too important. They carried the living mold itself, smeared on the inside of their coat pockets to keep it alive. Satisfaction, a true spy mission for medicine. They were about to ask American industry to do something that had never been done before, with no guarantee of success. The fate of the war, and millions of lives, now rested on a smear of mold in a scientist's pocket. When the scientists arrived in America, they didn't go to the White House. They went to a small government lab in Peoria, Illinois. This was the heart of America's agricultural science. Satisfaction, an unexpected location. It was here that the U.S. government made a monumental decision. This wasn't just a scientific project. It was a military priority. They assembled a consortium of the nation's biggest pharmaceutical companies, Merck, Pfizer, Squibb, and told them, "Stop what you're doing. Make this." But the problem was immense. How do you turn a laboratory curiosity into an industrial product? The original mold strain was weak and produced tiny amounts of penicillin. The first attempts at mass production were a disaster. Satisfaction. It's not as simple as just building a factory. The project needed a breakthrough, and it came from the most unlikely of sources. The lab put out a nationwide call for moldy objects, hoping to find a better strain. A lab assistant named Mary Hunt earned the nickname Moldy Mary for her tireless search. One day, she brought in a cantaloupe from a local market that had a pretty golden mold on it. Satisfaction. The hero was a random woman and a piece of fruit. That cantaloupe mold, officially known as strain Penicillium crucigenum, NRRL 1951, was a monster. After being exposed to X-rays and UV light to force mutations, it produced over 1,000 times more penicillin than Fleming's original strain. The puzzle was solved. The bottleneck was broken. Now, the American war machine could do what it did best: scale. Companies like Pfizer, who had expertise in fermentation from making citric acid for Coca-Cola, pioneered a deep tank fermentation method that allowed them to grow the mold in vats the size of buildings. Satisfaction. So Coca-Cola technology helped win the war. A great aha moment. The numbers that followed are the true emblem of this victory. In 1943, the U.S. produced 21 billion units of penicillin. By 1945, it was producing over 6.8 trillion units. Before the D-Day invasion, the Allies stockpiled enough penicillin to treat every single anticipated casualty. The invisible assassin infection had been defeated before the first boot ever touched the sand. Satisfaction. A huge strategic advantage. The German High Command knew about penicillin. Their spies had reported on it. But they believed the production challenges were insurmountable. They had catastrophically underestimated their enemy. And for a soldier like Hans, that underestimation was about to become a personal miracle. Back on the front lines, Hans was moved from the chaos of the battlefield to the organized chaos of an American field hospital. To him, this was already a shock. The sheer number of tents, trucks, doctors, and nurses was overwhelming. His own army's medical units were stretched thin, constantly running out of supplies. Here, everything seemed abundant. Satisfaction. The industrial might is visible even at the front. He was placed on a cot, his leg burning with fever. He knew the signs. He waited for the saw that would take his leg, or the priest that would take his last rites. Instead, the doctor approached with a tiny needle. "You're a lucky one," the doctor said. Hans didn't understand. Why would an enemy waste a miracle drug on him? Was it a trick? Some kind of experiment? Satisfaction. I understand his paranoia. He saw other Germans in the tent, equally bewildered, receiving the same treatment. The shot was given. He fell into a feverish sleep. The next morning, he awoke. For the first time in days, the world was clear. The fire in his leg had been extinguished. He looked at the wound. It was clean. It was healing. In that moment, the entire world that had been constructed for him by Nazi propaganda, a world of ruthless, Barbaric American enemies began to dissolve. Satisfaction, the physical and ideological healing begins. But the final blow to his belief system came not from an American, but from a fellow German. A captured German military doctor lay in the cot next to him. Seeing Hans's disbelief, he whispered something that would haunt Hans forever. "Don't be so surprised. Our own high command. They have penicillin back in Germany. A small supply smuggled from Sweden." Hans looked hopeful for a moment before the doctor delivered the final crushing line. "But it is reserved for the generals of the SS, for the party elite, not for you, not for us." This was the ultimate revelation. Satisfaction, the biggest payoff of the story. He was not just being saved by his enemy. He was receiving care from them that was actively being denied to him by his own leaders. The Americans saw him as a life worth saving. His own government saw him as expendable. The war for him was over. Not because he was captured, but because he finally understood who the real enemy was. This experience was not unique to Hans. It was repeated thousands of times across Europe. The Americans wielded penicillin not just as a medical tool, but as a psychological one. Every German soldier saved was a testament to a different kind of power. A power based not on conquest and racial purity, but on production and compassion. Satisfaction. I understand the broader strategy. The Red Cross reports from POW camps told the story in stark numbers. The death rate from disease and infection in American-run camps was astronomically lower than in German ones, and even lower than among civilians back in Germany.
These saved soldiers sent letters home, heavily censored, of course, but the truth slipped through. "I was wounded, but I am recovering well. The care here is surprisingly good." These messages became whispers that spread through the German ranks and back home. Whispers that countered Goebbels' propaganda machine more effectively than any leaflet bomb. Satisfaction, the kindness became a weapon. How can you convince your soldiers that the enemy is a monster when that same enemy is fighting to save their lives? Hans survived the war. He returned to a shattered Germany, but he carried with him a memory more powerful than any medal or ideology. A memory of an enemy who chose to heal instead of kill. He and thousands like him became the foundation of a new, post-war relationship between two former enemies. Satisfaction, the long-term impact is revealed. They had learned the ultimate lesson of the war, that the true emblem of a nation's strength isn't its ability to destroy its enemies, but its capacity and willingness to save them. The arsenal of democracy had produced its finest weapon, an arsenal of healing.